But just to flag up the conference theme, so it is about children these next 2 days. And why is it about children? Because they are a research population that are often missed in silence and excluded from these kinds of things. Children are not often taken seriously as knowers, and they're seen as not capable of making claims about knowledge, even when it's about their own living experience. And they are extremely capable of doing that. They're never really seen in science and research as beings in their own right, and they're always seen as becoming the adult rather than that being in their own right. And I think over the next 2 days, I think hopefully we'll hear about research where children have really been centralised and involved. And if you look around the room, there's a lot of research studies that really show that, and how children are involved and how important it is that we involve children in this research. I think I've already touched on the idea that consciousness is really tricky, and I'm certainly interested to see how we all think about consciousness again over the next 2 days, and I'm sure that we'll have different, probably similar and different ideas about what that means, but also why is it important, how can it be important for us to research that with everyday people, but to make a difference in the world, because that's the key thing, it's how can we make a difference doing that. And culture is a very, very important theme, and we have the idea that there are various cultures, some of them saying very similar things about who we are and why we're here, and what is all this, what is it made out of, and all these ideas that are the same, and some are different.
The other thing I never do when I give talks and then I get into trouble for it is define consciousness. Because, as I said, it means many things to many people, and whenever I give a talk and start talking about consciousness, after about 5 to 10 minutes, somebody says, but wait a minute, what do you actually mean when you say consciousness? And it's a fair question, and one that I don't like answering really, because there's a lot of things I can mean by it. But I thought for the context of today, the purposes of today, it would be a good idea to think about this term and the things people do mean when they talk about it. And I mean, at the most basic level, perhaps, sort of the level of wakefulness, more conscious when you're awake, theoretically, than when you're asleep. If you're in a coma, you're presumably less conscious than when you're asleep. That sort of level of thinking about it. People also mean aware. And in neuroscience, quite often, just are you aware of stimulus? You flash a light at somebody. Do they actually detect the flash of light? Depends a bit how long it lasts for. If it's very quick, often you don't. Or are you not aware of it? So that sort of level. That's not really what I mean when I say consciousness, but that is how it's often defined in neuroscience. So another one is the difference between conscious versus subconscious. Stuff happens in your subconscious and you do stuff that you then make up an alternative explanation for your consciousness. Sentience, that's a word I've been using because it gets, I like to think it might get me away from some of these issues a little bit. A sense of self, being aware of yourself. That's one I do use consciousness for, I have to say, as a word. Self-reflection, so being conscious of yourself and able to reflect upon yourself. Ties into things like free will. Is that something we have? I have neuroscientist colleagues who would argue free will doesn't exist. I tend to think that this audience probably has a different perspective on that, but we can talk about that later maybe. Super awareness, is there such a thing as a greater consciousness that we all tap into? How does that relate to God, if there is one?
I just wanted to introduce our next fabulous speaker, Professor Kate Adams from Leeds Trinity. Very excited to have Kate here today and very grateful. I'll just read a little bit of Kate's biography. So Kate is a Professor of Education at Leeds Trinity and specialises in children's spirituality and the implications for schools, with a focus on understanding the spiritual experiences from children's perspectives. And I know that Kate and I do a lot of very similar work in our research, and I can't believe we've not found each other before now, but that's another story of synchronicity.
I talk about the spiritual dimension of childhood, but I'm open to lots of different ways of looking at it. I don't see everything through the lens of spirituality as such. And just as Sarah was talking about, the word consciousness means lots of different things to different people. So, of course, does spirituality. But just to be brief, I recognise that for some people it's connected to religion, and for others it isn't. And for children, I'm looking at the theme of how children find meaning and purpose in life, and that any connections they might have to something, not just to themselves, but to something greater. So my work, I draw on different branches of psychology, sociology, and anthropology to me is so important when it comes to culture, because as Donna mentioned in her talk at the beginning, Indigenous voices have been lost. And lots of things that Western children say actually resonate with Indigenous communities. So I think anthropology is really important to help us question our own taken for granted assumptions.
And art helps us to think about things in different ways. So this is a quote from one of the artists that I worked with. She's a professional community artist. And she says art helps us to see things differently. It helps us to see what's there in a different way. Artists think about how things make you feel. And I know somebody earlier was talking about feelings, you know, that's what really matters. And I think that's what this work is really about. It's about what children feel. So some questions that I'm always thinking about. How does the creation of art link with their experiences of nature? What do they want to say about nature and the environment? How can we respond to their perceptions? And how, or can, indeed, arts-based methods and arts outputs change anything? I noticed in this particular picture that there are little people in this landscape, and they're climbing the trees, they're jumping in the river, and they're playing, they're skipping. And the child said that the river is there to jump in and the trees are there to climb up. So this interaction between nature and children is not simply just about looking at it or walking through it sedately, it's about being in it and working with it. Similarly, here is another child's picture. We gave them, see, this is something, we gave them some shells, amongst many other things, pipe cleaners and coloured paper and all sorts of things. The shells could mean what they wanted, of course. So I think in this picture, they are rocks. In other pictures, a shell might mean something else. So, you know, children are using the material at hand in order to create something that means something to them, that makes them feel something.
I am a child psychotherapist, not a child. So that's my paid work, that's my job, and having a huge interest in that, and as we're all here today, you know, talking about children, the importance and the role that they play in research. Obviously, doing a PhD in parapsychology, that's something that's really interesting to me. So we're looking at squishing them together and just see what comes out. So I'll start with some things that I don't know how many of you in this room know, but there's been numerous surveys. You know, almost half of UK adults believe in some form of afterlife. 48% of people in the UK say that they've experienced anomalous events sometimes or often, and 42%, you know, people questioned in a UK survey said that they have experienced a paranormal encounter. Now, as a child and these adults reflecting on it, again, I've grown up with it, so this is a case of who I am, and it's changed how I see things. There's obviously much more, but these for me felt really profound. If an experience like that can change how you view yourself, how you view life, how you frame your identity and your experiences, these are really, really big things, and we need to focus on that. And the second sub-theme was altering their professional recreational trajectory. So these experiences that they had actually changed the way that they behaved, the things that they did.
Reflecting my background in parapsychology. So the plan is to tell you a little bit about what parapsychology is, so we can identify those areas of overlap with other people's research interests, and to focus in particular on something called clinical parapsychology, which David earlier said, what's that, when we were mentioning it. So this is apposite, so I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by clinical parapsychology and how that might be relevant, particularly to working with children. And you'll see there are a number of themes reflected in the talk which reflect the kind of conversations we've been having so far. And if I were to have contributed to the poster from the morning session just before we broke up, in terms of what the main lesson for today for me has been, it is very much this sense that working in these kinds of controversial areas can feel very isolating. You can feel as if the whole world, and certainly the establishment, is against you, is resistant to anything you have to say. And it's really encouraging to discover so many like-minded souls working on very similar issues with the same kinds of concerns, but just under a different label, often using slightly different research methods that help us to tackle these issues from slightly different perspectives. And I think events like this that take us out of those silos, as Katie described it, is really important for the movement going forwards. It really does feel a little bit like we're at a tipping point. There seems to be more kind of interest and more empathy for this as a subject area. It seems to have garnered a little bit more legitimacy. And I think the more we can collaborate, the more we can help support each other, I think the more likely that tip is to take place. And again, when you ask, well, what is that based on? Often it's based on personal experience. So in our survey, over 5 million people report that they have had personal experience of near-death phenomena. So that's an astonishing number of people for us to dismiss this as some kind of pathology. Deathbed phenomena, nearly 6 million people, 5.8 million people report direct personal experience of it. 4.5 million people in the ADC, and 7.5 million people believe that they've witnessed a ghost at some time.
Kirsty, I'm so grateful that Kirsty joined UCLan as a senior research assistant recently to work on a project that is funded by BL that is investigating children's extrasensory experiences across various cultural contexts. And this ties in with, I think something Natalia talked about yesterday, or a question was raised around, you know, really making sure that in this work we're also including various cultural beliefs, practices, narratives that again are, you know, highly valuable for us trying to understand who we are and what this is all about. So I will hand you over to Kirsty.
We've been speaking with some secular groups, Christian, Muslim and Roma, and obviously we're hoping to have more and more, and it's in the north and the south, so we've done quite a bit up here, sort of Lancashire, Yorkshire sort of way, and the next phase is really looking more down London sort of way, and then we're kind of south-wise of England. It's split into different approaches, so we've got adults, so that's parents, us professionals, people who work with children and young people, filling out questionnaires about experiences they've encountered via a child or young person, so how they kind of responded to that, how they dealt with that, how, what happened, what was said, etc. The older young people, bit of an oxymoron, they can also fill out questionnaires about their own experiences and also how maybe the adults in their life responded to that. Was it helpful? Could it have been better? And then with the younger children, we're doing in-person sessions. So we're going into schools, going into clubs, going anywhere that'll have us really. And we're having kind of like play sessions, and we read a story, and you know, do some arts and crafts and things like that. And we allow the children to sort of tell us in their own ways about their experiences. Scenario quite recently, where a little girl was sort of cleaved to this like medical kit, hence the picture. So she was carrying this little toy medical kit around, and she sought Donna out, and she sort of wanted to examine Donna, and I think Donna got a full medical in the process. You know, she was getting, you know, spigonal manometer and her temperature, everything was going on. But she was talking about her memories. She was talking about how she could remember things from when she was a baby. And she could remember things from when she was in her mummy's tummy. And then she could remember things from the before time. And she talked about how she remembers seeing her older sister before she was born. And she does have an older sister. And there was a lot going on there in that particular case, but it did turn out that during pregnancy, the mum had experienced an assault and was punched in her womb area. So whether there's some kind of connection with this and the medical, we don't know, we can't really speculate too much on this, but it seemed very important to this little girl to be associating the attachment to the medical kit while she was explaining this.
Children, consciousness, culture, it's just a combination of what I've been working with across all three throughout all of my life, individually and together. So what I'm doing a little bit is giving you a little of how I come to be here today, telling you a bit of my story, which navigates me through all of those things. What to me is the greatest significance so far, I've spent a long time as a layperson studying the implications, done a lot of work with a physics professor on the implications of quantum physics for a new world view. But for me, the standout experiment is the double slit experiment that some of you will be aware of. And this, if you access it afterwards, is just a 5-minute, very humorous but very powerful way of that experiment. And for me, the main point to be made is the observer influences the behavior of photons. So just to simplify it completely, the photons can be behaving like waves, but when you try and observe whether they're waves or particles, they collapse into particles. And the physics professor I was working with at the time said that the best explanation of it was that the particles had consciousness.
I'm going to talk to you about exceptional human experience, which is just a kind of another umbrella term for all of this stuff, anomalous experiences, parapsychological experiences, even transpersonal experiences. The term itself was originated by Rhea White in the 1990s, and she said that exceptional experiences are those of an anomalous nature, but they become exceptional human experiences if they are taken through to their kind of full potential, in that they have the capacity for the transformation of the individual. And she identified numerous different types. She read through hundreds and hundreds of essays that had been submitted to her about people's exceptional experiences and catalogued them and categorized them into different groups and came up with, you could categorize them many different ways, but the way she did it was that they were psychical, mystical, death-related, encounter or enhanced experiences. And so I think that, the challenges here are twofold when a child has an exceptional experience. Is the child having to process the experience themselves, and also the parents or guardians, respective adults, are also having to process the experience. And so there is an additional level of challenge, and it's not just the individual's own process. But there's various stages that go through. One of the first parts of the stages is, am I crazy? Who can help me? What's going on? How do I explain this? The depotentiation is that you can deny the experience or repress it, rationalize it, ridicule it. And on the positive side, it can lead to a search for understanding, to begin the exploration of trying to explore this experience at face value. Second stage is that often people will begin to wonder where they can find the truth, ask themselves questions. Am I unique? Am I special? Or am I just another weirdo? Yes, we're all another weirdo, which is a good thing. And then as the process deepens, looking to find and reconfigure one's worldview, in light of those experiences, is perhaps the potential for derealization and depersonalization. Where does my identity fit in with this new worldview compared to their old worldview?
And there's also a similarity in many spiritual traditions. Many spiritual traditions have a similar idea that childhood is a time of natural spirituality which is lost in adulthood. This is a very strong idea in Taoism, for example. In Taoism, one of the goals is to return to the state of the infant. He who has in himself abundantly the attributes of the Tao is like an infant. So the idea is that as a child, children have this natural mental and also physical flexibility and openness, which we try to recapture in our adult spiritual development. And in Taoism, that's expressed in the exercises of Tai Chi and Qigong. You're trying to cultivate natural flexibility, the kind of suppleness which children have naturally. And this idea is quite common in psychology too. Even in mainstream psychology, there are many psychologists who believe that there is a kind of, like what David was saying about this natural lantern perception, this heightened awareness, which children have naturally, and we lose as we become adolescents. This is also Alison Gopnik, who David mentioned. She wrote a really great book called The Philosophical Baby, about trying to show that children are natural philosophers, natural scientists, natural poets. And I love that. I'll just read this quote from her. I love this quote. She said, "I believe that babies and young children are actually more conscious and more vividly aware of their external world and internal life than adults are. I think that for babies, every day is first love in Paris." And again, you can see that if you have young children, or if you're in the company of young children, you can see this amazing sense of wonder that they have, this exhilaration in just being alive. They have a very direct, immediate perception of the strangeness of this wonderful world that we live in.